Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads coming to you from a very echoey room. So it has been almost 3 months since I've posted a video, which I'll be completely honest with you, I recorded an entire video in the month of March, but I was like a complete gremlin in it. Like I had my hoodie up, I was like gross. Things were not going well for me in March in the sense of like there was just too much happening. In case you aren't aware, which I feel like I've said this in every video for a while, but I'll just repeat it in case anyone's missed it. I got married and I moved into a new house that I purchased. I got married in the middle of April, and the month of March was just like a complete blur and like a mental struggle just to get everything done that I needed to get done for both the wedding as well as getting the house ready. We did like major renovations to this, and then like getting my now husband moved in and then getting me moved in and just everything. It's been a lot, but we're not finally, but we're really starting to settle in. Obviously, if you could probably tell by the sound quality, not fully moved in yet, but like these things take time and we're not like trying to rush into it too much because we don't want to like, spend all of our money all at once and things like that, trying to be responsible about it. But the room that I am currently recording in is the room that is my office, like when I'm working from home. And then also it's going to be turned into my library. My bookshelves have not been moved over yet, but all of my books have been moved over. They're currently sitting in piles, both in this room as well as in a spare bedroom. And the goal is to get my existing bookshelves over here. But we also know that we need to buy bookshelves because one, I was keeping books in my dresser in my old room. And so we don't plan on utilizing that method of storing books in this house, at least not right away. So we want to buy more bookshelves. And then also like my husband has books and he was originally keeping them in his office, but some of them he wants to keep like in the general, what we're calling library room. And so we need to buy more bookshelves. And so that is a work in progress. But yes, this room is very echoey because there's no like rug. My like desk and computer is all set up, but like there's still boxes around and things like that. We're slowly unpacking things and trying to get settled and figuring out where everything's going to go. But obviously it's going to take time. So I apologize for the sound quality and even like the lighting. It's pretty good because I'm like sitting directly in front of a window, but it definitely needs some work and it'll take a little bit of time to adjust. So yeah, the other sort of confession thing is that I recorded an entire video and then I went and looked at my YouTube channel and realized I'd only posted a January wrap up for this year. And I definitely thought I recorded a February wrap up, but I did not. Or maybe it was part of the video that I scrapped, I know, but I thought I had one that I posted. And so I recorded an entire video just talking about the books that I read in March and April. And then I realized I have not talked about the books in February. So what we're going to do, because there's a decent amount of books that I need to go over, is I'm just going to run through these relatively quickly. I'm not going to give super detailed synopses. Not that I ever really do, but I'm going to try to be relatively quick with this because I have to get through these books. So there's 9 books that I need to go over, which isn't a crazy amount in booktube standards, but obviously it's going to take a little bit of time. But also it's been 3 months since I've read some of these, so yeah, we'll see how it goes, but I'm going to try to be relatively quick with all of these books. So first on the list is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is a very popular book here on BookTube, and so I picked it up partially because of the hype, partially because I wanted something cozy, and partially because I did this thing for my wedding, which I'm going to brag about a little bit because I'm very excited about how it turned out, where my favor for the wedding was that everyone was going to get a book. I worked with a local Chicago bookstore called Roscoe Books. They're fantastic. I love them. And I gave them like a list of books that my partner and I both love. She worked really hard to acquire those as well as to like basically fill in gaps where like there were certain genres or certain like age ranges because we had a wedding with kids and things like that. And so she like filled in the gaps and like everyone got this like little ticket with their program for the ceremony and you could like give the ticket in order to get a book and things like that. And basically the idea was every person could get one book, and like if there was someone there who didn't want a book, they could give their ticket to someone else. It went so well. People were so excited. Like so many people have told me that like as soon as they heard about it, they like ran to go get a book because they wanted to make sure that they could get the book that they wanted and things like that. I'm so happy with how it turned out. But anyways, in February, once it became like a real thing that we were going to do, like basically I talked to the person at Roscoe Books and things like that and sort of coordinated things, and I was like, okay, this is going to be a real thing. I started to read books thinking about the gaps that I have in my own reading that I wanted to sort of fill in. So Legends and Lattes sort of fell into that because I was like, I don't read a lot of like science fiction fantasy books, and I'd heard really good things about this one, and it felt like a book that people that were coming to my wedding could be interested in because they read fantasy and things like that, but they might not have heard of already. So that was literally my motivation, my main motivation for picking it up when I did. But honestly, I really love this book. It deserves all the hype it's getting. If you are in the mood for something cozy, this book is just like so sweet, but in a way that doesn't feel like overly cheesy or saccharine. Like there have been a couple of other like cozier books, specifically cozy fantasy books, where I'll start reading them and I'm just like, this just feels like so cheesy. And I don't know how they did it, but the author like did such a good job of like towing the line of like having just enough conflict that you're like interested in the story and just like really immersing you in this world and like having things work out in a perfect way, but it doesn't feel ridiculous or cheesy. I just really, really love this book, and it's definitely worth all of the hype that it's getting, in my opinion. Next is If I Never Met You by Mhari McFarlane. Mhari McFarlane is an author who has been put on my radar because of a couple of other booktubers who I follow who like mainly read like literary fiction and things like that. And they mentioned Mhari McFarlane as a romance author that they love. And so as a person who doesn't read a lot of romance and has a hard time figuring out what romance to read, I was like, okay, Mhari McFarlane is an author who I want to check out. And so I basically just went to my library's website and picked out like the book that they had available, and I read it and I loved it. Like this is a book that if you grew up watching like 2000s rom-coms, that's what this book feels like in the best possible way. I definitely don't remember the main girl character's name, but basically like she was in a long-term relationship with her boyfriend, and at the very beginning he breaks up with her. She ends up getting into a fake dating relationship with someone else at her work for reasons. You can read the synopsis if you're really interested. And I just loved it. Like I love fake dating premises in general, so I was already here for that. But like I genuinely cared for these characters. There were like moments that I literally gasped. Like I'm not going to talk about all the details of the plot again, but there were like plot reveals in regards to like the ex-boyfriend where I was like, what? Like literally shocked that these things were happening. Like how often does that really happen when you're reading a book, specifically romance books that feel very formulaic a lot of times? And like that formulaicness is a reason why people pick up romance books. But like for me, like this was genuinely a fantastic romance. So again, if you're someone who enjoys those sorts of rom-coms, like the How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days or the 27 Dresses and things like that, like this is the perfect fit into that. And I'm very excited to pick up more Mhari McFarlane. Next, I read Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. This is another one where I was trying to fill in the gap of like literary contemporary fiction, and I had heard really good things about this one. I didn't really know too much about it in terms of plot. I just knew it had something to do with kids who like go up in flames or something like that. But basically you're following this character named Lillian who has this friend named Madison. They have like a complicated history that you learn about in the story, and basically like Madison is marrying this famous politician who has 2 kids. Those 2 kids like burst into flames whenever they get like stressed out or anything along those lines, overly emotional. And so Lillian gets hired to basically deal with the kids and potentially help them like not burst into flames all the time. This story was so much like sweeter than I expected it to be. Like it genuinely reminded me a lot of House of the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Like I feel like If you want that sort of like warm and cozy vibe of that book, but you're willing to go a little bit more literary, then this is 100% the book to pick up. Like there's very much this like found family aspect to this story that I think is really well done. It's a lot more like fun and lighthearted than I expected it to be. And I just found like it to be really well balanced. Like this is a very, very well done book. I know that it was like nominated for awards and like people really like this book, but like it just sounded so weird that I didn't know quite what to expect from it. And I'm so glad that I finally ended up reading this book. So yeah, that was definitely a very nice surprise to pick up that book and really, really enjoy it. Then I read Mules and Men by Zora Neale Hurston, and unfortunately, this was probably the low point of my reading in February. This is a nonfiction book, and it has like two parts in it. The first part is Zora Neale Hurston talking about how she wants to record all these like oral histories and stories and sermons and songs that is very common like Black folk tales. And then the other part of this book is all about like voodoo and things like that. Specifically, she ends up traveling to New Orleans and like talking to people about that. This book is like interesting from like an anthropological standpoint, but I didn't really enjoy the reading experience of it. And once it switched over to the parts about voodoo, I was definitely like more interested in the book. But there's just like so much happening in terms of like the oral history stuff, and I just wasn't super into it. There was like a review I saw on Goodreads where someone was like, this book belongs alongside, I think it was like Joseph Campbell and things like that, like famous anthropological works. And as soon as I read that, I was like, you know what? You're correct. But that doesn't mean that this was a good book for me. And that's what it comes down to. Like, I recognize the merit of this book and the importance of this book, but it was not a book for me. Then I ended up picking up Small Favors by Erin A. Craig. I had read a previous book by this author called House of Salt and Sorrow, and I really enjoyed that book. It's very like creepy and atmospheric, and I was very like surprised by how much I enjoyed that book because I don't really enjoy most like horror and things like that. So I decided to pick this one up because I'd seen that this book was out because of Kayla over at Books and Lala. She included this in one of her videos, and I was like, oh, I like that author. Let me pick up that book. In this story, you are following mainly this character named Ellie, I think that's her name, Downing, and she lives in this small town called Amity Falls, and they are a very like secluded town. They're very like cut off from the rest of the world and the rest of society. They like have people who like go off to get supplies from the main town like a couple of times a year and things like that. But they're very like insular. People don't come visit them. They have like their own set of rules and things like that. And then all of a sudden people start like disappearing and dying in the woods. And there's like a lot of debate about like what's going on, what to do about it, things like that. Like, are these just normal creatures like bears and whatever that are attacking them? Or is there like something more fantastical like monsters and things like that in these woods? And then like some strangers show up and people go missing, and this starts to become basically like a story of like a town that starts to turn on itself a little bit. You see like the consequences from there, as well as like what is causing all of this chaos in this small town. This is also a very like atmospheric, creepy book. It's very, very slow paced, but like the sense of anxiety that I felt while I was reading this book was so high. Like, it took me a while to read this book because I genuinely like could not read big chunks at a time because I would start to feel like so much like stress reading this book. Is this book perfect? No. I didn't love necessarily like some of the stuff that happened towards the ending, but I think it does a really good job of, again, creating a really creepy atmosphere, but also looking at like these sort of rising tensions in a small town and seeing the seeds of doubt being planted in people, and then these people like turning on each other and things like that. And it's like very interesting to see sort of like how tensions build over the course of this book. It's really like just eerie and just like a really good gothic story. So if that's your jam, check out this book. I listened to the audiobook of the third book in the Finlay Donovan series, which is called Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun. I'm not going to talk too much about this book because it's the third book in a series and the plots kind of like hinge on the previous books a little bit. But I will say that this was my least favorite Finlay Donovan book, and it's also very unlikely that I'm going to continue on with the stories. It's funny because I picked up this audiobook and then I realized that this was one of the book club picks for Kayla over at Books and Lala, I think for the month of February. I did not realize that. So I ended up watching the live show, and basically everyone had the same reactions as I did, where they were just like, this is not super great anymore. It seems like this book series was supposed to be 4 books and it's getting extended into more books, and it's very unlikely that I'll want to keep going with this because the silliness is getting a little bit too over the top. This one specifically like takes place at a police academy, and like it's just getting like too insane and too out there and requires too much suspension of disbelief. There's also this storyline that has to do with like this major like Russian mobster, and like I don't understand like why everyone thinks that Finlay is so much like smarter than she is, or like this calculated killer and things like that. And like there's just like a lot of details where I'm just like I just can't anymore. So it's not for me. It's a book I listen to in the background while doing other things, and so it's very nice for that aspect of it. So I could see myself picking up the next audiobook only because I'm like, I want something to listen to, but I don't want it to be something that requires a lot of mental energy or a lot of concentration, because genuinely it does not matter what happens in these books. So if I miss a major detail, I'm always just like, I don't really care. Like the plot gets revealed at the end. So yeah, I'm like done with the series. It's like fine. It's not the worst, but it's just getting more and more ridiculous, and the circumstances and the stakes are just getting higher and higher, and I'm just like, I'm not here for this anymore. And then I continued on with the mystery series train, and I read Exiles by Jane Harper. This is the 4th and presumably final book in the Erin Falk series. In this book, Erin Falk goes to this Australian wine country town for a friend's baby's baptism, and the baptism is taking place at the start of this like festival that happens every year. Last year at the beginning of the festival, a woman named Kim ends up going missing, and the past year has been all about trying to figure out what exactly happened to her. And so Erin Falk, being a detective, ends up getting sort of roped into the case a little bit and trying to figure out what happens. This book was also like kind of a disappointment. It's probably like my least favorite out of all of Jane Harper's books, but also this was during a time when I was DNFing books left and right, and so the fact that I finished this book also shows that like this is not a bad book, but with Jane Harper writing such good books, like it's sometimes hard to reach that bar. The mystery itself is very interesting. I will say that there's some like interesting storyline details that go on in this book because it deals with like a group of friends who have been living in this town their entire lives, and they grow up and some of them move away, and it's about like sort of those small town relationships and how interconnected they can be to each other. And I definitely enjoyed all of those aspects of it. The thing that I didn't enjoy was that there's a personal storyline that comes into play with Erin, specifically a romantic storyline, and I was just like, I'm not here for this. To me, Erin Falk was not a detective or a character that I had a strong personal like connection to. Like this is only the 3rd book in the series, and so while there is some like backstory given to Erin Falk in the other 2 books in the series, like to me the mystery was always the most interesting part and the most important parts, and his backstory just provided like little details that provided some insights into like how he works as a detective. Giving him a romantic storyline and then like the way everything wraps up in this book, I was just like, was this necessary? I don't know. Like it feels like it could have just been a book that had this mystery and then just kind of ended, and it didn't need like a wrap up as if it's the epilogue of Harry Potter and things like that. All right, 2 more books to talk about. First is Diary of a Void by Emi Yaga and translated by David Boyd and Lucy North. This is a Japanese story, and you are following this woman who is in her 30s who lives in Tokyo, and she works at this cardboard tube manufacturing company, but she works in like the office side of things. She's the only woman who works in this office until she ends up getting delegated a lot of like menial tasks like cleaning up an office after a meeting and preparing coffee, or if they get like treats, then like cutting up the cake and serving it to everyone, things like that, like these very like feminine tasks, so to speak. And she gets really tired of being required to do this since it's not part of her job title. And so one day she ends up not cleaning up after her coworkers after a meeting, and someone talks to her about it, and she basically ends up saying that she was unable to clean up after her coworkers because she's pregnant and the smell was like too much for her to handle. And she's not pregnant, she's just lying about that fact. But that starts basically this like major change in like how people treat her. So she's not required to do these tasks anymore because she's pregnant. She doesn't have to work overtime. She is allowed to like be at home and like relax and watch TV and go grocery shopping at like a normal time because she isn't working super late anymore. You see sort of like how her life changes because she starts telling people that she's pregnant. And she goes beyond her coworkers. Like she joins an aerobics class that's full of pregnant people, and she gets like those little buttons that say like I'm pregnant, so that way she can sit at the subway and things like that. This is a book I had heard about and I had heard relatively good things about, but I picked up this book and continued reading it for the main reason of like I needed to know how it ended. Obviously, if you're faking a pregnancy, you can't like fake a birth, so at some point like the ruse has to be up, or like I just didn't know what the possible conclusion of this book could be. So I feel like I mainly picked it up for that reason, but I was very surprised by how much I ended up enjoying this story and enjoying sort of the character development, the relational development between different people in this book, and sort of like this day-to-day look at the way women are treated and the way that changes when you become a wife or a mother, things like that. Like it's a book that has like a very weird premise, but it's very well written and well translated, and I found it to actually be like a really enjoyable experience reading this book, and I found it very just like fascinating to read, and so it kept me going during a time when, again, I was DNFing books left and right. And the final book I have to talk about is The Davenports by Krystal Marquis. This is a historical young adult romance. It takes place in the 1910s, and you are following this affluent Black family in Chicago named the Davenports. The story is told from 4 points of view. Olivia and Helen, who are 2 sisters who are part of the Davenport family, Amy Rose, who is their maid, and Olivia's best friend, Ruby. So for Olivia, she is the oldest, and she's getting to the age where she needs to figure out who she's going to marry. So she's trying to figure out what exactly she wants in her husband. There's Helen, who is the younger sister, who has no real interest in traditional like feminine things and is actually really interested in being a mechanic and working in the family company, which is a carriage company. You also learn a little bit about their brother John through these perspectives and about how he really wants to turn the family business of being a carriage company into being a car company because cars are the next big thing, and so they need to get on this now. Amy Rose is a maid for the Davenports, but she has dreams of opening up her own hair salon for Black people in Chicago. And then Ruby's father is running to become mayor of Chicago, and if he was elected, he would become the first Black mayor. But they've put a lot of their own family money into his campaign, and so things are starting to become a struggle for them. And Ruby's parents want Ruby to secure a marriage to John Davenport, who again is very affluent, probably the most affluent family in Chicago, and would help provide a lot of security for Ruby's family. So overall, I like this book. I didn't love it. The reason why I think I didn't love it is because it's told from all 4 of these perspectives. And while it's nice to see all of these different parts of this world, I think it would have been a stronger book if it was structured more like a traditional romance series where you get the one perspective in one book and you meet kind of like these side characters, and then the future books in the series are from those side characters' points of views, because 1, it never feels like you get deep enough into some of these storylines, and then 2, you see kind of how formulaic the plots are for all these different stories. Even though they're all going through their own kind of unique struggle, so to speak, there are a lot of points in the book where you read like 3 or 4 different perspectives in a row, and all 4 of them go through basically a similar thing where they're all facing the fact that they are not in love with the person they're supposed to be in love with, or they all face this major anxiety about like having to tell their parents something, or they all say I love you or get told I love you at the same time. And it's just like, look, I know romance books can be formulaic, but seeing it back to back to back like this is a little obnoxious. So again, I think like those sort of formulaic aspects of a plot aren't as obvious when you're reading them in separate books, but when you read them literally one chapter after another, you're like, all right, I get it. But overall, like I enjoyed being able to read this type of story during like this time period. The author has a note at the end where she talks about how she was inspired by an actual family that she had learned about that was an affluent Black family in Chicago in the 1910s who ran a carriage company, and the son ended up turning it into a car company, but that ends up going away. And she talks about how you don't get to read a lot about like affluent Black families in historical times and things like that. And so for that aspect, I really enjoyed it. And I think there are parts of this that are really interesting. But for me personally, the structure of it just made it so I couldn't quite love it. So yeah, those are all of the books that I've read over the past few months. I'm still figuring out, life and my routines and moving and unpacking and getting settled and all of that stuff. And so reading hasn't been a super high priority for me lately. I'm basically like doing it when I can. So I don't have any real goals or things that I could tell you in terms of like when I'm going to be posting or anything along those lines. We'll just have to kind of see what happens. But I definitely wanted to get a video up, especially since it's been like 3 months and I wanted to like wrap up these books. I do want to do a Q&A video in the month of May, so feel free to leave questions down in the comment section below. I wanted to do it partially because it's been a while since I've done one. It's been a while since I posted a video, so it might just be nice to have that to do. And then also May is my YouTube anniversary month, and so I just feel like this would be a good time to do a little Q&A. So feel free to leave questions down below. It can be about whatever. Ask me about books, ask me about movies or TV shows or music, ask me about the wedding, ask me about the house, things like that. I also have dreams of doing a video, like vlogging the experience of putting this little library together, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, feel free to leave me a question down below that I can answer in a future Q&A video, or let me know down below a book that you've been reading recently that you really enjoyed. I feel very just out of the loop because I've been so consumed with real life stuff, and so I would love some book recommendations, so feel free to leave that down in the comments as well. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.